Hey everyone, welcome to redesigning product metrics for AI evals. It's more supplementing product metrics for AI evals, but I feel like ChatGPT gave me redesigning as the better hook. So you just have to do some of this stuff for marketing. But I'm Sean. A little bit about me. I'm a principal data scientist at Entra. We're a legal tech AI company. Been there for a bit over a year, solely focused on AI evaluations for our data science team. Been working in data science for a little over a decade across both B2B SaaS and consumer products. So you can see some of the companies I worked at up here. Previously, actually before grad school, I was in education a bit. So I was a teacher for a couple of years, which is why I like doing lessons like these and also doing them at my day job. One other kind of fun plug, I'm a co-host of a podcast called Data Neighbor. We started about a year ago. We talk all about data as it pertains to AI, especially, and we have AI tech company leaders, some exciting stuff coming in 2026. I think that's relevant for this group is we have a new series we're going to be launching. I'll talk more about the end, but it's called Measuring the Machine, and it's solely focused on AI evaluation. So we'll do episodes on that for a couple months, actually. So today we're going to talk about is going to be a little more of a high level framework, how I think about approaching metrics as they pertain to AI products when I'm working with a prod dev team. We're not going to be doing like any coding or really like be looking at any data or getting into like the nitty gritty stuff today. I do have a 6-week kind of applied hands-on course that I'm kicking off in April, where we'll get way more deep. So we'll talk about the foundations, which this is a mini preview to. We'll talk a little bit around instrumentation and observability. We'll talk about, more importantly, how do you interpret success and failure of AI outputs, and actually more importantly, how do you connect them back to the actual user value and the business, as well as the whole flow. Once you've created this metric, how do you operationalize it? How do you set up different forms of operationalizing it where you have safe layers within your development environment as well as in production? So who should join? The assumption coming in here is you're someone who's working on an AI product. So product managers who are shipping AI-powered features, data scientists, analysts who are measuring it, and engineers and MLEs who are building and maintaining those systems, either currently or sometime close to the future. And then last plug on here, we'll get to the good stuff. And out of my ad I have squeezed into this presentation is that we have discount code here, AI Metrics 30, for those of you joining the session. Okay, the ad's done. Let's get into product metrics. Why do we have product metrics is a good place to start. I was actually doing a podcast interview this morning. He mentioned this quote I really liked, that a metric stops becoming useful once you start trying to optimize it. Product metrics are not about the metric. The metric's not the goal. Product metrics exist to support product decisions. So they're effectively just tools that allow us to answer what are we going to do next. And they should be directly tied to real decisions. The cost of a wrong metric should be the cost of a wrong decision. And the benefit of a really strong metric should be a benefit of making good decisions in your product over and over and over again. When to ship a product, when to roll back, when to invest further, when to stop. Why do we make product decisions? So product decisions, these all exist just to help our users, our customers accomplish the goal they came to the product for. Humans don't wake up and be like, I can't wait to engage with SaaS platforms today. That's not their goal. The ways in which a lot of us measure them around DAO and retention and these kind of metrics don't actually reflect the behavior they're trying to do. I'm going on a trip to Hawaii. I want to book my tickets so I can get to Hawaii. Or the holidays are coming up, or my friend's birthday's coming up. I want to get them a gift that they really like. So that's why they're on Amazon. That's why they're on sites booking their flights. They're not on there to have, I don't know, long dwell times. So this creates this gap between what a user is actually trying to do and what we see them doing in product, right? So you can have two users who have very similar observations within our system. They both viewed a page. They're on there for 5 minutes. They had the same amount of scroll events. But one of those users in the real world might come out with, say, we're talking about Amazon or some sort of e-commerce site again, that they've identified the right size and great fit of a product that's gotten to them, and they're going to keep it and use it forever. And someone else could find some basic info or not even buy it, or they get it and they return it. And so a lot of what product metrics are is just trying to bridge that gap between these system outputs, these product outputs, and the actual user's job to be done or value. And so if you worked in product analytics, or product data science, or product development, you're probably familiar with the concept of North Star metrics. And the reason I go through all of this is because, I want to lay the groundwork of like how strong metrics work today before we get into how AI kind of upsets it. But North Star metrics are really that bridge between these really frequent and measurable, but gameable system outputs and the actual business via the user value that someone's acquiring. And so if you think about it kind of in terms of a hierarchy, you have these leading indicators, these input metrics, these system outputs at the very bottom. These are things that you can get down to the millisecond. They're really easy to measure and quantify most of the time. At the very top, we have super lagging indicators, things like business outcomes, net revenue, or churn, things that could take us months. So if we make a change right now in the product, we'd see those input metrics change immediately. But if we make a change in the product that's bad, we're not going to see that user churn potentially for months later. And we can't wait months to understand what's going on in the business. The North Star metric helps us connect these two together so that we can leverage input metrics that we know are grounded in like user value, this metric that we basically prioritize like what the team's working on this quarter to like these bigger business outcomes. So it's a way to focus the team, prioritize their work, but also to tie their really granular day-to-day movements back to the business and the user. So what we're going to talk about mostly today is around that lowest level, those driver metrics or input metrics or system outputs or whatever you want to call it. So these are really attractive because they're frequent and measurable, as I mentioned before, but they're also pretty high risk because they only work if they directly connect to that North Star. So they're like highly gameable. For instance, if you have an input metric like users clicking on my email, and we know if someone clicks on the email, they're probably going to come to my site and they'll get value out of the site. Well, one way to increase those email clicks would just be to spam them with a bunch more emails. And that's not actually going to end up providing them with whatever user value we're trying to get them out of when they come to our platform later on. So that's kind of what I mean about gameable. There's all sorts of, dark patterns that arise in products, especially consumer products, keep people on certain sites longer and engage them longer, that got optimized around metrics, but don't actually end in user value. I think it's really common in like engagement metrics. We're not going to go through how to kind of ladder up that input to North Star to business outcome causality today. We'll actually do this hands-on in that course I mentioned, but I'll also host a lightning lesson in January that goes into some of the methodology because there's different approaches to this. There's stuff that's pretty lightweight correlation. There's the gold standard of experimentation, actual A/B tests, but that's often not always feasible. And then there's this middle area of causal inference modeling. So we'll go through some of those approaches in this upcoming lightning lesson in January if you want to check it out. So that all being said, traditional metrics and traditional measurement assumes this stable product logic, this deterministic code. So we know that a user input will result in a predefined or at least some predefined set of system outputs. There can still be some variance there, but it's a more understandable distribution that we can then more confidently connect to our North Star and business outcomes. AI breaks that assumption around that like really deterministic output because we're dealing with a stochastic model. And so you can have many possible outputs, many outputs like we'll never see, and then like an actual output. This is a challenge because, when you're in the early stages of a product, you might see AI products with like amazing demos that are working on like a very small amount of inputs that they've honestly like may have nailed to some degree. Even those demos from some of the AI products like don't even go well on predefined inputs since they're still using a probabilistic system unless they're faking it. But as your user base grows, as the use cases change, even as it doesn't, the same input can have wildly different outputs. And so that's why I think you're seeing a lot of like AI evaluation become really important now because we've had a few years of companies since GPT 3.5 come out start working with this stuff in their product. And some of them have nailed in development, but now as they scale, they're seeing all this output that they weren't able to predict and they're not hearing about it and their metrics, they're hearing about it from their customers. And by the time you've heard about it from your customer, unless you're working with some customer who's in a beta and is in an experimental mindset, a lot of the time it's too late, especially with all the agentic workflows, which are even harder to diagnose. And so people are already coming into AI products very skeptical. And it's really, really easy. Like anything, it's really easy to lose trust. And then it's really hard to earn it back, which is, I think, is probably one of the reasons where I've seen a lot of teams decide like we need to invest in AI evaluations. This is where, at least where I see like the kind of AI metric living in the existing hierarchy as one of these input metrics. These input metrics are really deterministic previously. Some of them are model scores that are coming out of existing models, but now you're ending up with these like non-deterministic answers that kind of screw up or complicate at least the North Star interpretation. High level, how I think about this, the unit of observation. If previously the unit of observation for that input metric was the output of a model where we could have some sort of precision or recall or accuracy score. Now I think it's the output as experienced by the user. And this makes it really complicated when we are trying to answer the questions, what do we evaluate? Because it really depends on the product and use case and the user. For some people, evaluation may look like just like correctness or faithfulness. For others, it's going to be completeness. Some could be like safety or tone or style. But at the end of the day, I think a really good place to start, for me at least, is just to start with user experience. That's what I try to ground myself in every time. And then after I can understand the user experience, I can begin to form hypotheses and translate those to metrics. So process I kind of go through is start by defining the user value in the workflow in the real world you're trying to improve outside of your products. Like name the workflow steps, the thing that the person is trying to achieve. Define what bad would be when they're trying to do that work, what good might look like. These two questions are ones I try to answer at this step. What's the job the user is working to accomplish? And then, hey, how is AI supposed to help? If you base yourself in that, like you're gonna be so far ahead than folks who are trying to take cookie cutter metric suites from other products that don't pertain to their users and plug them into their own workflow. Start from where the user is. Once you have an understanding of that, you can begin translating it into hypotheses. So if we increase, this should say AI quality, we would expect to see X resulting in Y user behavior. So you're effectively converting those thoughts around what good and bad look like to claims about how it might show up in the product and then how the user may behave in the product once they realize that. So what would AI output that's helping accomplish that job look like? Can we develop a measurement of the AI output that reflects that? And what would we expect the user to do when the AI feature works well? There are many different ways to kind of measure that and judge that. A lot of it comes down to working with some form of ground truth. There's many different approaches to getting ground truth, and some are going to be more robust than others. For me, I typically opt for ground truth that can be as close to something that's coming from the user themselves as possible, whether that's historic user data or some sort of output within the product itself that you can align to. If you don't have users, you're not going to have that. So that's not always the case. This is why we see a lot of subject matter experts and domain experts becoming really important now with their leveraging them for review. Other ground truths could be authoritative sources, so other documentation you're matching to, or simple rule sets. And how we judge against these can vary out quite a bit too. It could be purely human review, some sort of like a rubric across many humans. I'm sure you've heard of model judges for scaling some of that human-based review and even programmatic checks. One more plug for another lightning lesson coming up in February. A lot of this kind of development of ground truth and validating ground truth and review requires some form of annotation. At least what I've found is that the best kind of way to do these annotations and just remove as much cognitive load and effort from that annotation as possible is to reflect it as close to the user experience and the product itself as you can. If you're annotating chat, for instance, having some sort of UI that has a chat interface is a lot easier than trying to flatten chat into a Google Sheet. We'll cover this in depth in the course as well, but I'm also going to do a little lightning lesson just on like how to vibe code your own custom annotation UIs for your product. So check that out. These like judgments or ground truth options, the ways you judge these can vary in different ways. You can create metrics that are structural, simple checks. You can create ones that are similarity, rouge or blue, or some bespoke version of that, which you're looking at similarity between texts, or you can do some sort of judgment check, human review, or LM as a judge. I think the main takeaway, though, is that you probably want to use more than one of these things. Even if you find out that you can use similarity scores that work really well for your product, you're still going to probably want some sort of semantic check as well in order to diagnose them. So you'll end up with many probably different metrics, and you'll have to figure out a way to basically prioritize and filter them. A great way I find for doing that is kind of now returning those metrics back to our kind of metric hierarchy and identifying at least if not a correlative or causal relationship, a logical relationship between them and a North Star validated by the business outcomes. So we can identify a smaller suite of kind of key quality indicators. Due to its unpredictable nature, even if you've gone through that whole define user value, form a hypotheses, I've linked them back to my North Stars and I've filtered and prioritized some suite of metrics I'm feeling really good about. It doesn't really end because, as we mentioned in the beginning, as anything changes with those inputs, the outputs are going to change too, and new cases could potentially arise. You're just not going to have the foresight to basically account for every definition of what the user's needs are upfront in the beginning. And so it is a bit of a continuous process here, not a one-time setup. And so where that lives in the outcome here, I think you kind of insert this new loop. Your system output isn't going directly to inputs as well into your North Star metric. You're creating this whole nother loop of defining how do we interpret that system output rather than directly correlating them to North Stars. And if you do that, I've found like you're able to iterate a lot faster because you create a metric that people can look at in the leading day to day. You get better alignment across your team, which just makes conversations so much easier when you're trying to figure out what you're all working on. And you also are able to set up a lot more safety nets for these launches as people are a bit more risk averse to AI products. Okay. Nice. This is good on timing so far. So, a few upcoming things. Yeah, check out the course. Feel free to, connect with me on LinkedIn. I think my email is on that course page as well. If you have any questions, you've got the promo code there. I also write on Substack with my colleagues, Hai and Sravia. We both run that podcast, Data Neighbor. So, we talk a lot about data in general. We post our podcast episode kind of readouts on there. And then we've been talking about AI evaluation a bit lately. We'll probably be talking about kind of like AI-powered analytics as well, a lot more on there too. We've got that new series I mentioned coming up in February. So we're talking to the VPs and leaders from Brain Trust, Arise, Prompt Layer, Trace Loop, a few others, Composo. Check that out. And then we've got those lightning lessons I mentioned are on validating the impact on the business and creating custom UIs. I'm sorry I didn't leave enough time for questions. I did want to pass it over to Stella because she has a really great course.
Oh, thank you, Sean. Thank you for leaving time for my shameless plug here. I also teach AI evals and analytics course on Maven. Is called AI evals and analytics playbook, where we share our battle-tested playbook that we use in practice in industry on evaluating different types of AI products. Yes, so you're all welcome to join us. Our next cohort starts in January 16th. It's going to be a 2-week course. We have one session on Saturday, one session on Sundays for 2 weeks. So 4 sessions in total.
Thanks, Stella. And Stella, you have a great Substack as well. So I'd mention following them on that.
Thank you for mentioning that. I also drop it. Also share a lot in Substack of my experience working on AI evals. You're all welcome to join the conversation. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and also comment in my Substack posts.
Sweet. Thanks, Stella. I'm gonna close it there. We're at time. Probably that was a bit of a speed run, but thanks for joining. And if you have any questions, connect with me on LinkedIn or email me or whatever. Thanks, everyone.